Welcome to the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, telling the unique stories that make up the diverse fabric of Pennsylvania.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Sydney Harris. William Murdaugh, the first keeper of the National Register of Historic Places, once said, "At its best, preservation engages the past in a conversation with the present over a mutual concern for the future." As America approaches its 250th birthday, it's easy to think of history as something that happened in the halls of Congress or on the battlefields of revolution. Some of our most vivid and most complicated stories are held in the buildings right down your street. In Northwest Pennsylvania, the Crawford County Historical Society is proving just that. Their work to restore Holland Hall and the Tarr Mansion isn't just about preserving the past, it's about how we carry it forward. Joining me to share that vision is Josh Sherretts, Executive Director of the Crawford County Historical Society. Josh, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Can you tell us a bit about your role at the Crawford County Historical Society and the organization's overall mission?
So my role is that of executive director, and it's been, a 20-year in the making situation. I was part-time and started as the museum director at the Baldwin Reynolds House Museum, and then a very, very part-time executive director, and it's been full-time for the last couple of years here. That said, and I bring that up because it's sort of advanced like the organization has and our mission has. Our goal is to use Crawford County's past to help enrich its future. And that's very much what sort of our day-to-day here at the Historical Society and my day-to-day in this position are doing, between preservation projects and archival material and recording the stories of the people of Crawford County to hopefully use that to enrich life for our children and grandchildren and so forth in years to come.
And the Historical Society clearly goes far beyond just restoring buildings. You're preserving stories, hosting events, and educating the public. How would you describe the overall impact that the Society has had on Crawford County and the region today?
It's massively different than it was even 20 years ago. Building preservation is a part of Crawford County Historical Society's mission, and that's largely because we are the only countywide historic preservation entity in this area. But we have an oral history program that's in partnership with Pennsylvania Humanities we unveiled last year, and we've been out collecting the stories and history of everyday Crawford Countyans, individuals who were born and raised here who might not be here now, people who moved here who might have been from other areas, to really see what is making and will make Crawford County special. The events and educational outreach that we do, everything from free tours of our facilities for all of the third graders in Crawford County as part of their local history curriculum, to lectures, to teas, living history. And our goal is very much to make history as much of a relevant part of the lives of the people here as possible. That's very much a change from the 20 years ago. We were a small organization who owned the Baldwin Reynolds House Museum, which was the home of a U.S. Supreme Court justice that lived here in Meadville. But other than that, most of our offices and archival and everything was based on the second floor of the local public library, and we had a few free lectures a year. We've since then owned several museums. We've taken on a few major preservation projects, and we're very much trying to take history to where it lives, all over every corner of Crawford County. We're working on cemetery preservation. We quite literally bought a 1921 Ford Model T depot hack, which looks like sort of a mini Model T tour bus. And we've been going from corner to corner of Crawford County to take history there versus just expect the public to come to us. So I think the big part of this is really learning about the people of Crawford County today and trying to be as much a partner and a relevant partner as possible.
That is so cool with the Ford Model T and bringing history to the people. I love how you said that you're working to make it relevant to the people of Crawford County. So that's fantastic. And this big picture work that you were talking about really does come to life in the Society's preservation projects, especially two that have captured a lot of attention: Holland Hall and the Tarr Mansion. Let's start with Holland Hall, an architectural gem with an incredible backstory. Can you walk us through its evolution from log cabin to one of Meadville's most iconic homes?
Holland Hall is a strange building. And when I say a strange building, it's two buildings in one and covers generations of Crawford County's history. It's the oldest still standing brick building in Crawford County. And it was built in 1807 by a man by the name of James White, who owned a tannery on Terrace Street in Meadville. And in 1807, we are talking the city of Meadville was 19 years old, one of the first settled areas of Crawford. So we're talking barely more than a frontier area here. James White was one of 13 people in the city of Meadville, and even a few more than that in the county, that owned slaves. And I think that's one thing that a lot of the public doesn't quite think of firsthand, that, wait a second, we're up north of the Mason-Dixon line, but that doesn't mean that slavery wasn't here. It wasn't as prevalent, but it was indeed here. And so James White owned a slave with the tannery here in Meadville. And so there's that component of this building's history. In 1827, the French Creek Feeder Canal, an offshoot of the Erie Canal, which is celebrating its 200th anniversary this year, the Erie Canal. French Creek Feeder Canal celebrates its 200th anniversary in 2 years, was started right out in the front yard. And it basically connected Crawford County with the rest of the world. You could get items much easier, and you could send items out from manufactured here much easier than traditional horse and wagon. And it all happened basically in the front yard of this property. The second generation to own it was Colonel John Bliss, who led Lafayette 200 years ago this year into Meadville on his national tour. Next door was the United States Supreme Court Justice Henry Baldwin, the brother-in-law of Colonel Bliss. The generation after that, a young lady who was given it as a wedding gift, Frances Reynolds, married a gentleman by the name of Arthur Clark Heidekoper, who owned one of the largest horse ranches in the history of the world, at about 12,000 acres and 23,000 horses out in the Badlands of the Dakota Territory, was ranching the next ranch over from Teddy Roosevelt, and was working with Andrew Carnegie on visiting his private island to talk about the best way to consolidate railroads and give John D. Rockefeller a better run for his money. So it was very much every generation. This building has had something important that could have been talked about in one of those if walls could talk situations. And it's the only Gilded Age home left in the city of Meadville, but it became a fraternity after the Heidekoper family passed away. The husband passed away in the 1920s, wife passed away in the 1930s. And it was cared for very well for many, many years. Unfortunately, it fell into disrepair towards the end of the fraternity's life there. And then in the 90s, it was closed as a fraternity, and it's been about 30 years vacant. So when we purchased it in 2021, it unfortunately had been abandoned for about 30 years. People remember everything from fraternity events there in their college years to driving past it as a kid, to even a few much older people remember when some of the private residents were there in the 1930s before it changed hands. So it's that building that if you mention Holland Hall, everyone knows what you're talking about, but everyone knows a little different piece of its history. So we're excited to bring those 200 plus years of history all into one spot through historic preservation.
That is quite the history. Just every almost era of the house being something different and unique, and you can draw stories from. Speaking of unique, the design of Holland Hall draws inspiration from the historic Holland House in London. What are some of the unique architectural features that stand out to you, especially as you're restoring the house?
The house was, in 1899, a small brick house, the one I mentioned that slavery happened here and saw the canal and whatnot, was moved back from up by the street, up the hill, I say, but within a 2-acre yard here. So moved up sort of a sloping yard and tripled in size. And it was designed by a member of the Heide-Koper family who actually designed Mark Twain's house. He got his inspiration from Holland House in London. Holland House, unfortunately, was bombed during the Blitz during World War II, but the inner shell of the blueprints of Holland House match up almost identically to that tripled in size 1899 Holland Hall. At that time, AC and Frances Heide-Koper were the couple that owned it, were taking world tours. She writes in her journals about dancing with President Grant, comments about his dancing and his smell. So they're in Italy, they're in England, they're in Egypt, and they're bringing back things and they're meeting prominent individuals along the whole way. The fireplace mantle is 2 statues of Hercules that came from a villa in Italy circa the 1600s. The stained glass windows are reputed to be Tiffany. We've since done some homework to see it might have been a student of Tiffany's in the dining room. The entire front hall was designed after these statues that I mentioned, including the fireplace, including the stairs. It's full of Brazilian mahogany. And when you walk through what's left of the house, and I say what's left of the house because it is a major rehabilitation effort, because it sat empty for 30 years. Previous owners had done some demolition to get ready for renovations and then didn't follow through. But there are areas where it is very much that 1807 federal-looking building where you can walk into a room and go, okay, wait a minute, this is one era of our history. And then you walk into the next room and go, okay, wait a minute, Andrew Carnegie could have been standing in this room at some point. So there's a lot of the bones of the property. It's built like a fort, and a lot of the bones of the property are still intact. Unfortunately, a lot of other areas, the bedrooms and so forth, are gutted back to the studs and brick, which is how we purchased it in 2021. There was a fire there in the 90s, and a lot of that and a lot of fraternity renovations throughout the mid-20th century have been peeled back. So when we bought the house, it was at a mixed condition, but it had most of the most prominent features still intact. So we're thrilled about that. And that's the big reason that drew us to try to give it new life.
And I think it is so cool that though the Holland House in London was destroyed during the Blitz of World War II, that it still echoes today in Crawford County, which is something that I didn't know, and is almost like Crawford itself is preserving this really amazing piece that was countries away. So it is quite ambitious. As you said, there has been some damage. It has been gutted in some areas. What is your long-term vision for the property, and how do you see it contributing to the cultural and economic life of Meadville?
The vision for the property is sort of twofold. The first one being the city of Meadville has not had a hotel in the city limits in over 20 years. So there is a over 200 bed per night deficit of hotel rooms in Crawford County. And as a result of that, there's an amazing potential. I mean, if I said, we're going to have a second house museum right next to the Baldwin Reynolds House Museum next door, that would be fantastic. However, the Historical Society walked into this very much knowing we're in a population of a bit over 80,000 countywide. We're in a population of just under 13,000 citywide. Multiple house museums along the same street just aren't sustainable. So how can we preserve the building, save the building, and put it in best use for the community while respecting its history is sort of where we've been planning. And as a result of that, the goal is to make it a mix between a boutique hotel and restaurant. Because it is a large building, we've been working with a local nonprofit by the name of Green Frog Studios. It's a group of artists. In amongst those artists, there are a couple of architects. There are many current and retired carpenters and contractors. They've been assisting, and they're looking at using some of the common areas as gallery space and using portions of the building as a place for studios. So overall, it's going to be a mix of a boutique hotel and some art studios / art gallery, which very much play off each other even better than you might think at first, just because those artists have been able to go, no, we're not just dealing with drywall and 2x4s. We're dealing with 1890s terracotta, and let's look at how we reconstruct it, and let's look at how we rebuild plaster crown molding from scratch, and let's look at all of these artistic trades that have been mostly lost over the last post World War II. So it's a great opportunity to fill a need from the boutique hotel end. We're looking at about 14 rooms with their own bathrooms. The basement has everything necessary to have a pub-style restaurant, and then still space for the art. So we started very much with we're the developer of last resort. Unfortunately, I think this property would have been torn down already had we not stepped in. And it is a big job, but thankfully, between the artist end of things, you sort of using those schematic design drawings and advancing from there, and the Phi Delta Theta fraternity, which was the fraternity that I mentioned that had it for many years, their alumni very much looking at this, going, how do we save our alumni building or our fraternity house, and how do we give back to the city of Meadville? How do we give back to Allegheny College? How do we give back to the fraternity that helped formulate our lives? They've been great partners at both on the funding and the skill and the efforts to make it all happen.
That is incredible. And I am really excited to see how this progresses. I would like to switch gears here, kind of take a moment to pause. The Historical Society does focus on more than just Holland Hall. Holland Hall is a really amazing and ambitious project, but I'd also like to talk about something that you also work on, which is the Tarr Mansion. Can you tell us why this property is so significant to the story of the oil industry in America?
So Holland Hall is sort of, on the Historical Society's end, playing the long game. We know it's a big project. We know it's going to be years in the making. We're saving it from the wrecking ball, but we're also doing so knowing that it will be happening with a lot of people and happening over the foreseeable future. On the flip side of that, the Tarr Mansion is just as much a nationally significant structure, but with a different history and very much playing the short game. The Tarr Mansion was James and Elizabeth Tarr's home. And James and Elizabeth Tarr, if you're an oil history buff or a Western Pennsylvania history buff, James Tarr owned the farm where a lot of early oil wells, it was called Tarr Farm, outside of Titusville, Pennsylvania. And it was where a lot of the early oil drilling occurred. And James Tarr, through oil leases, was one of sort of the first oil millionaires or oil barons of Western Pennsylvania. Went from us owning a small farm, actually documented financial trouble prior to that from the farm, from how non-fertile the ground was and so forth along Oil Creek in places, and how rocky the ground was, to getting $2 million off of oil leases and oil royalties, which we're talking in the high 30s or low 40s in terms of millions of dollars today. So we very quickly shot from rags to riches. I mean, I jokingly say it's sort of picture Downton Abbey mixed with the Beverly Hillbillies. It's sort of where, if you picture James Tarr. And it prompted him to, at first, move up to Venango, Pennsylvania, and purchase what is now Venango Valley Inn and Golf Course. And that was his farm for a short time. And then I think he realized, hey, wait a minute, if I have the equivalent of about $40 million, why am I still farming? And he decided he was going to become one of the quote-unquote gentlemen of the county and run for county judge. And so he quite literally bought property on Diamond Park at the heart of Meadville, 2 buildings over from the county courthouse, had the house that was there for quite some time leveled to the ground, and built a large Italianate mansion. And it's built as a row house almost. It's actually 2 separate buildings or 2 separate houses with a shared wall down the center. So this was very easily something you could see in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, side by side with 6 other ones just like it. It's a stoop-like front porch and sort of a great hall staircase up one side of the building for the 3 stories. But it's just 2 houses versus a block of them. And he ran for county judge. He did lose. I guess you'd call him a bit of a maverick. I mean, his daughter applied to go to Allegheny College, wasn't let in, asked why. They said she was lacking in many skills, including common sense. And he said, well, let me know how much I need to pay to buy her some. So, I mean, we're very much talking sort of the eccentric personality. Unfortunately, he died very shortly after the house was finished. The house was built in 1866, finished in 1867, and both he and his wife were gone by 1877. and their children had it for a while. I mentioned it was a two-piece row house. One side was the parents, one side was the children. And then by 1900, it was mostly apartments. So it's a very early apartment building. It was sort of the high class on the town square apartment building, owned by the Tarrs at first, and then descendants lived out of the area, and then eventually owned by others throughout the 20th century. But the history here ties the county together. It's not just oil history, but it ties Titusville to Meadville. It ties... And coincidentally enough, on the oil history end of things, several decades before Edwin Drake hit oil, the Shryoks were drilling for salt in Beaver Township, almost to the Ohio line, and went bankrupt as a result of drilling for salt brine to boil off to sell salt. Went bankrupt when this black liquid ended up flooding their salt brine reserves and their salt wells. And sure enough, it was oil out on the other side of Conneautville. And then here we hit Edwin Drake in the far eastern part of the county with Titusville, and then moving here to Meadville in the central. So this building unites a piece of our history, and it unites the county together. But it very much unites a multiple generation history of oil in western Pennsylvania and a 200 and some years of Crawford County's history all into one spot.
And your organization makes sure that this building isn't just about the past. It now includes research facilities, apartments, and community spaces, again, blending history with modern day. How does that blend and function help keep the building alive?
It does. When I mentioned Holland Hall was the long game, and this is the short one, when we purchased this building, it was being looked at for demolition. Again, it was in disrepair. It was right on the town square. It was right near the courthouse. The courthouse was looking at expanding, which they have done, and looked at this real estate as an option. And we stepped in and worked with the county. They basically said, if you want it saved, figure out how we can save it, and we'll work with you. And so what they did is they changed their building plans and repositioned where the new courthouse addition was going to be. And in doing so, we were able to save this. And it was, again, as I mentioned, an apartment building. The upper floors are still apartments. During COVID, we had an Airbnb for visiting nurses that Meadville Medical Center was bringing in from other areas. And the first floor is utilized as our archive, our research facility. There are public meetings here quite often. College interns who are using this as a research facility to learn about the area that they came to, and quite honestly are getting excited about the area they came into by learning about its history. And then the apartments up above not only add a level of sustainability, because they're covering the cost of the slow but progressive restoration that we're doing on the building, as well as the utilities and so forth. So it's very much a regular, living, breathing, non-stuffy structure that we're in the process, as part of the America's 250th, adding the first true county museum space in Crawford County. There are different heritage and historical societies that have their area specifically. The County Historical Society has owned the Baldwin Reynolds House Museum for 60 plus years, but it's a house museum. So this is everything from the zipper and the invention of the zipper to the discovery of oil and everything in between, all under one roof in one gallery space. So that's coming to be opened for next year for the 250th. But it's one more way that we're hoping to very much make this a relevant part and a living, breathing part of everyone's history and everyone's story here in Crawford County.
And both Holland Hall and the Tarr Mansion, as we've talked about, were at risk of being lost. What goes into deciding which historic properties to save, and how do you rally the community around this preservation?
That's a complex question. And I say that because in an ideal world, it would be, and this is truly wearing the history nerd hat here, it would be fantastic to save as many of these as possible. But as the Historical Society, we can do two things. We can save the ones that fit a certain criteria that I'll mention in a second, and be an advisor and a partner to others who are looking at saving others that we can't necessarily get involved in. And unfortunately, we've had several that have been brought to our attention that someone has said, oh, would you save this church? Would you save this house? Do you want this? Would you purchase this? And unfortunately, again, it's we don't want to spread ourselves so thin that we can't properly do anything. We'd rather try to do our best in a confined area that we know we can have eventual successes. So that criteria largely has been, is there a larger connection? Crawford County is blessed to have a lot of what we call where local meets national or where local meets international history. The Baldwin Reynolds House Museum was a U.S. Supreme Court justice appointed by Andrew Jackson, was involved in the acquisition of Florida, was involved in everything from dealing with slavery and the complex history there on the Supreme Court, I should say, to the Cherokee Nation and the Trail of Tears, again on the Supreme Court in some of those cases. The Tarr Mansion has the oil history end of things. The Holland Hall has that Gilded Age ranching and that Teddy Roosevelt, the Andrew Carnegie, and those histories. We own the Johnson Shaw Stereoscopic Museum, which is Keystone View Company in the days before TV and radio was the large stereoscope, sort of the predecessor to the Viewmasters we played with as kids. The largest manufacturer of those in the world was here in Meadville. So we own properties that have a where local meets national or where local meets international significance. We have properties that in an ideal world have a sustainability plan. And that hasn't always been the case, but that has been far more the case in more recent years, or at least under my tenure here. For example, the Tarr Mansion with the apartments, it covers its expenses. And it might be a slow restoration, but it is a restoration that we can set aside funds every month from those apartments to put back into the building. And so as we grow, we try to very much make sure that that it has a history for all and a history that can be paid to sustain.
And of course, historic preservation isn't just about buildings. It's about the stories within those buildings. How do you balance preserving the physical space with telling complex stories, including even difficult chapters like you mentioned, slavery at the Tanner White House?
We've learned that history doesn't care what we think. History just is. The two biggest examples are on the Baldwin Reynolds House end of things. Henry Baldwin was a centrist on the court for the most part, but very much was as the Constitution as it is written says that slavery is legal, and was kind of the opinion that if you don't like it, change the Constitution. That said, he falls on a complex mess he was not much of a reformer. And it's a history that is a difficult one, perhaps, but one that does need told and does need shared. Because we can't learn from it if we don't know it. And future generations can't learn from it if we don't know it. And the same with the Tanner White House. And honestly, that's a history that we knew that Tanner White, and I say Tanner White, James, quote unquote, Tanner White, because of the tannery there. And that was sort of his nickname, even in contemporary letters and such at that time, from what we've been able to ascertain. We knew that the tannery was there. We didn't know about the slavery piece until we started examining the slave owners in Crawford County in the last couple of years, even since we purchased the building, and went, wait a minute, James White, okay, hold on, let's look up the address. Now let's look in the U.S. Census records and see, okay, there's slaves and there are slaves while at this address. Again, it's a situation where, in our mind, the balance is that the history should not be one thing or the other. History just is. It is the story of what happened, and it might not always be comfortable, but it is something that shouldn't be changed to make it more comfortable. It should be something that we do our best to respect and honor while still being aware that there were some very messy areas of our past that contributed to make us as a society who we are today.
And as somebody leading this important work, what excites you most about the future of the Historical Society and its role in Northwestern Pennsylvania?
We're an ambitious group, and I say that as our board of directors. I say that as our staff. I say that as myself. And even I would say that as based on those who are getting excited and getting involved, our volunteers, and even our donor base. It's a group that I think does more than I would honestly expect an organization in an area of our size, population-wise, to do. But then again, this is an area that has 3 thriving community theaters in Crawford County, and many other organizations that I wouldn't expect in an area of that population and size. And we kind of have that nothing is impossible mindset. So about that, what excites me is what we're getting accomplished. What excites me is that the history of the Historical Society, we have, in the path we've gone down recently, is ensuring that we are history for everyone. Everyone based on women's history, everyone based on Black history, everyone based on other ethnic minorities' history. We had a thriving Czech community here. We had a thriving Italian community here. We had a thriving Irish community here. And these are it may be a fairly Caucasian area at the moment, but that said, not completely. And we want to make sure that regardless of who you are, you walk into the Historical Society, go into the museum space, go into the archival space, that we're able to help you discover your story, and we're able to show off your history, and you don't feel like we're showing off everyone's history but yours. So it's very much that when I mentioned relevance in the community, we're very much trying to be the history for everyone here, or everyone in Crawford County. And as a result of that, we've had several of the smaller heritage societies and several other county historical societies sort of reach out and ask how we're doing it, how we're dealing with some of those complex stories, how we're dealing with sharing the Crawford County, Pennsylvania, and the nation's history, to make sure that when those third graders come in as part of their local history curriculum, they feel represented, regardless of who they are and what they look like.
And that is incredible. And so I have a feeling we have listeners even in Crawford County or outside of Crawford County who are listening and are inspired by your work. How can they get involved or support these efforts, whether that's through visiting, volunteering, or contributing?
All of the above. And when I say that, the Baldwin Reynolds House Museum and the Johnson Shaw Museum, the Stereoscopic Museum, are both open seasonally, mostly in the late spring through early fall. And those are open in the Baldwin Reynolds House case Thursday through Sunday, 11 to 4, and tours are free of charge. The local tourism bureau covers the cost of those tours to make sure that history is accessible for all. And Johnson Shaw is a $5 admission, so very reasonable, and Saturdays from 10 to 4. We'd love to have you there. We'd love to have you stop at the Historical Society itself and learn more about where you came from. Maybe we can help do some research on your family, do some research on your home, do some research on your business, and so forth. And also, we're always looking for volunteers, and that could be everything from volunteering at the front desk a day a week, to giving tours at one of our museums, to partnerships with things like the city of Meadville has a reproduction of the log cabin from the first settlement here that we open for opening for tours, or again, one of the museums or the new museum space. So looking for tour guides, looking for event volunteers, you name it. When you say contributing financially, absolutely. We would love to continue on this path of being ambitious and not just having lofty goals, but succeeding with them. And if there was someone out there who had found some of this exciting, happy to talk more about what that might look like, both financially, and also if someone says, you know what, there's this thing in my attic that I feel like is the history of part of Crawford County, then we would love to chat with you as well. And maybe it's through a loan, maybe it's through a donation, to make sure that those artifacts and those archival materials that might be under our noses are available for future generations to learn from and be inspired by.
Well, that is all I have for you today, Josh. It was such a fascinating conversation, and I'd like to thank you so much for being here and for sharing your passion for the Crawford County Historical Society, as well as the properties that they own, maintain, and keep alive.
Thank you so much. I was happy to be here.
Executive Director Josh Sherretts and the Crawford County Historical Society continuously champion the ever so important duty of civic storytelling, perhaps one of our most important duties. Their contributions challenge us to consider the impact of the people and places around us. The buildings we walk by every day can hold the legacies of war heroes, oil barons, judges, and even the uncomfortable truths of our region's past. And now, in this generation, our duty is to preserve and champion these spaces so we can ask better questions, tell fuller stories, and shape a future that reflects the teachings of the past. As we look ahead to America's 250th anniversary, this kind of work is more vital than ever. It connects us not just to national history, but to the places and people who've shaped our communities all along. If you want to learn more, get involved, or plan a visit, head over to crawfordhistorical.org and see how you can support their mission. And, of course, if there's a story in your town that deserves to be heard, send it our way. We know just how important it is to preserve the past by sharing it with the present. We'll see you next time. Stay PA proud.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassandra Coleman, Executive Director of America 250 PA. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. We encourage you to learn more about America 250 PA and send us your podcast ideas at america250pa.org.
This has been the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, produced by Commonwealth Media Services. Stay tuned for more epic Pennsylvania stories at america250pa.org.